All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're proud to have today on the podcast, after over a year, the great Jason Apollo Voss. He's the author of The Intuitive Investor, and he's the CEO of a company called Data, although I hear they are winding it down. We're going to talk a little bit about that. But thanks again for joining us at this table, Jason. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Javier. Thanks for having me on. I had a lot of fun the last time we spoke.
Yes, it's always great. And I hear you moved to Mexico. So what's going on there?
I did move to Mexico. There are a couple of reasons. One, the political situation in the United States is not my favorite thing to wake up to every day, nor my wife's. My wife is older than I am, and I asked her, "Do you want the last best years of your life spent waiting for this moment of, lack of cooperation on both sides of the aisle to fade?" And she said, for many years, yes, I think it's probably going to pass and this moment's going to pass. And finally she said, yeah, I think it may be a while, like 10 to 15 years. I'm 55. I don't know that I want to be 65 or 70 before I feel like I get my country back. Two, we lived in Florida the last time you and I interviewed, and I think the hurricanes and the hurricane problem is only going to get worse. When we moved to Sarasota, Florida, which is where I lived, since 1960 through 2018, when we first moved down there, they'd only had one hurricane. And in the time that we lived there, they had seven. And so many people talk climate change, and I know that's a controversial issue. For me, it's not. I think it's in the past tense. Climate changed and climate changing. And I think the hurricane thing was only going to get worse. And so to continue to live in beautiful Florida, and I miss the ocean, I miss our jungle that we lived in, is to accept that at some point you're going to, have severe damage to your possessions in the form of your car blows away, a tree falls on it, tree falls on your house, et cetera. And then the third reason is this affords me the ability to re-enter retirement, so to speak. I had retired when I was 35, exited retirement to try and be useful to the world. And I worked at CFA Institute, which people can discover on my bio. And I've sort of been in semi-retirement mode, but being in Mexico, it's real easy to ignore the rest of the world. So those are the three reasons we moved down here, and it's wonderful down here. It's better than I expected, and yeah, it's every day is fairly fun and peaceful, which is a nice change.
It is beautiful. Now, do you speak Spanish?
Sí, un
Sí,
poquito,
un poquito, qué
poco
bien.
a poco, ahora, meaning like each hour I'm getting a little bit better. Yeah.
That's right. Ahora. That was good. And it surprised me that actually a lot of parts of Mexico aren't cheaper than the United States. Is that the case where you are? I know a lot of parts of Mexico are even more expensive than the United States.
Well, I live in San Miguel de Allende,
Yeah,
and it is about a third of the cost of the United States, and it's
that's
considered an
amazing.
inexpensive city in Mexico. But like to put it in comparison, our monthly electricity bill in Florida was about $300 a month for air conditioning during the summer, and then we had a heated pool. So in the winter, we're paying to heat the pool. Our current bill here is around 60 pesos a month, which is around $3. So it's about a percent as much just on electricity. That's not true for all the bills. Like internet is basically dollar for dollar what it was in the United States, but it's much less expensive to live here for us.
So your money goes a long way. That's a great. Any
Yeah,
American who would want to move down there.
yeah. Our net is better than it was in the United States by a wide margin, and it was comfortable in the United States. Now it's genius.
So we talked a lot about your book, The Intuitive Investor, and it's to me, it's like almost like a religious experience. I know it's dated by now, but like I'll like sit in the bathtub with a cigar and read it and meditate on it. Sometimes it's helped a lot of my investment thought process. And in the last call, you said that you were working on a new addition to that book. Have you had more time to work on that in Mexico? And
I have, yeah, and thank you for asking. I was going to bring it up because I have media training, of course, and you're supposed to
oh,
take questions that are asked of you and turn it into the question you wish you'd been asked.
yeah.
So had you not asked, I trust me, I would have said it. Yes, in fact, if you go to my website, jasonapollovoss.com, you'll see it was brand new as of yesterday. I uploaded
Wow.
the new website, and just yesterday, behind the scenes, I'm working on a paywall so that I can put the new version of the book up once it's completed. And I think what I'm going to be doing is putting up the chapters as they are completed so that they're behind the paywall. And then I'm also, I've outlined something along the lines of 73 articles that I would like to write that I think are premium level content that will also be behind the paywall. So yes, I have actually made a lot of progress since I've been in Mexico.
Very nice. Can't wait to get that
Yeah, well,
book
that's
and
kind
read
of
it.
you.
There are a lot of updated sections you were telling me before. You were going to give some more stories or some more case studies.
Yeah. So I thank you for prompting me again. Yeah, the second edition won't be the second edition of the Intuitive Investor. I'm going to call it the Intuitive Investor Living Edition. And the reason why is I love books, as you can see,
Oh,
and I
yeah.
hate it when an author releases a second edition of their book and then a third edition and then a fourth edition, because I always have to shell out additional coin for not that much change in terms of the messaging. And I thought, what would I like as a book buyer? And I now read almost everything electronically. So I read PDFs of almost everything or Kindle versions. And so what I thought of doing is, so you pay a one-time fee, say $24.95, and then anytime I make an adjustment to the book, I will make it live to the book, which exists on my website behind the paywall. You'll get an email notification if you want, and it'll say Jason is, updated chapter 2, and this is the following topic that he's updated. And then because it's the living edition, you can go there and read the new material. And because I'm an aggressive footnoter, you can always see my references for the material, and you can mirror my thinking in terms of why I believe what I believe. And then that way, if I'm 95 years old, I'm still writing. You've only ever paid for the book once. And if you want to download it, I haven't decided yet if I'm going to allow it to be downloaded. I may limit it to, you can make 2 downloads, because I don't want people necessarily to distribute it to other friends, and hence avoid the one-time cost of buying the bulk of the content. So I haven't figured that pricing model out yet, but yeah, it's going to be the living edition. And in there's a ton of information about the science of intuition. When I published the book before, my operating assumption was, if I provide tools to the reader that allow them to replicate through meditation and other psychological practices, they'll be able to confirm for themselves the truth of what I'm communicating. And one of the pieces of feedback I received is, Jason, I trust you. However, it would be nice if you bolstered some of this with science. And in the 15 years since the book was published in 2010, well, I now have a library of, I don't know, 200 plus papers that demonstrate the power of intuition, the number of scientists who themselves have said, look, this insight about the periodic table of the elements, relativity from Einstein, quantum theory from Niels Bohr and others, they've basically credited meditation and contemplative practice with where those insights came from. And so a portion of the book is bolstering that material, but then it's also a more efficient book, because when I wrote The Intuitive Investor, it was a distillation of my state-of-the-art ability to communicate my experiences. And as of me being 40 years old, it came out when I was 40, I'm now 55. I now have communicated for the last 15 years with live audiences and through interviews. I know what material lands. I know what was confusing in the first edition, and it's going to be a much more efficient book. So it was meant to be a practical guide. You could sit down with it and blend intuition into your investment process. And I think it's going to be a much more accessible book and a more powerful book in terms of the tools. And if you come to the book as a skeptic, there's the scientific material that, presumably is going to bludgeon you over the head and convince you that what I'm saying should at least, you should have some curiosity about, even if you're not a true believer. So, yeah.
You got to prove it for yourself, just like the Buddha said.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And
Very
by the way,
awesome.
Javier, I love that you are still going back to the book and revising or revisiting the information. And for that, I apologize because, but for me publishing the second edition, that might be a more efficient effort, and you only ever have to reread it once.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. Well, not necessarily to get the information, but sort of intuitively get it, like sort of meditate on it, because you get more insights.
Yeah, well, that's very kind of you. I appreciate your patience with me as an author on that. But I'm really excited by the project, and it's something I've been working on since like 2016. Like the
Wow.
faults of the book were obvious to me like pretty early on, but because of my professional career and because of all of the stuff that life, throws at human beings, I've written it piecemeal. And so there'll be times in my career when I'll have 2 months of kind of available time and I'll write a couple chapters, and it's outlined to be like 15 chapters, and I've fully written like 9 of them. So I'm close. I'm close.
Well, it's
Yeah.
going to be a treat. And so, going into a little bit to what's going on with data, deception and truth analysis, you're the CEO of a company that was using AI to detect deception in corporate documents. And now you say you're winding that down. What's exactly the story behind that?
Well, I think the primary motivator is we haven't been able to get a recurring source of revenue that covers our expenses from the business. And we've encountered, and that this will be useful to the people in your audience, Javier, who tune in to your work because of insights into the behavioral aspects of the investment process. Um, my co-founder and I, as well as our investment cap table, I'm sorry to say, have funded a company that has created a product that has unintentionally discovered a not well researched behavioral quirk on the part of most people. And that is, and what we've discovered, and this is not sour grapes. I actually find it fascinating and debating whether or not I will research this myself scientifically. People have a very odd relationship to an objective measure of the truth. And I'll describe it in just a second so that the lessons that we have painfully learned don't have to be learned in the same painful manner for those who turn into your channel for investment skills. So here's an example. Fair Isaac Corporation, the creators of the FICO score, they first started creating, and this is the story that we've been sharing internally at Deception and Truth Analysis. They started their company in the 1940s, the late 1940s. It was 2 professors, and the 2 professors came up with a way of quantifying, they thought, credit risk. And they spent 2 years in development. We spent 2 years in development, and we've come up with a quantitative way of measuring the level of deceptiveness or truthfulness in almost any communication. It doesn't have to be a financial communication. And FICO sent out letters to every single bank in the United States when they had their quantitative measure in place. One bank replied. All the others didn't reply, or they said, we're not interested. When they went back to the banks and said, hey, why did you turn us down? Even though we can quantify scientifically the benefit of working with us and incorporating our credit scores into your work so that the loan losses are smaller, which then allows your cost of capital to drop, which improves your bank margins. People would say, well, nobody knows Javier as well as I do. Javier and his family have been banking at our bank for the last 2 generations. I go to church with Javier and his family. I know his kids. Our kids, are on the same football team together, et cetera, et cetera. There's no way your quantitative measure, which is this quantitative tool, could possibly know better than us. Fair Isaac did not break even as a company until the 1970s. It took 30 years. And all of those same objections we have received. There's no way your algorithm knows better than I do. Tim Cook of Apple's trustworthiness. I've covered Apple for 10 years. There's no way your measure is of use to me. And so what we've discovered, and by no means is there just one anecdote, it's almost universal, the response we've gotten. We've discovered that most people, and especially many professions that are charged with making prospective judgments, which is what investing is. You have information now, but you're investing capital for a future outcome that's undetermined. Most of the people who do that believe and trust very much their own opinion about the future. And they fantasize about their skill set around that. And when you come at them and say, hey, look, we have this objective measure where we could take your entire decision set over the last 10 years, and we can show you where you've made errors of judgment in judging management. We can tell you exactly scientifically, you keep making the same error in judgment. People have directly said, that makes me very nervous, and I don't want my supervisor to know. Why? Because they may have allocated billions of dollars of capital behind those decisions, and they think there's a legal liability. They may think their supervisor will then question their judgment and not trust them going forward. So they don't see it as a learning opportunity. They see it as a threat. Or they'll disagree outright and they'll say, there's no way you know. Let me say, well, excuse me, we've actually done scientific research published in scientific journals that demonstrates you don't know. They'll say, yeah, but those are the other rubes, not me. I actually know how to do this pretty well. Really? So would you like to put yourself to the test? And so the conclusion of what we've discovered is most people fantasize or construct a narrative about themselves that's actually a version of fantasy that they never revisit and they don't question their assumptions. So the lesson for your audience is you as an individual investor can outperform the pros because you can question your assumptions, you can revisit your skills, and you can constantly update them because we've learned that they're not willing to do that work. They're not willing to look themselves in the mirror and admit their faults. And the other aspect of what we've learned is the future will have this technology. My co-founder and I are confident, and this is one of the things in the intuitive investor that's one of my favorite heuristics.
You said that.
And the heuristic is the following. Can I imagine a world in 50 years that doesn't have this technology? Absolutely not, because we've been able to demonstrate we're accurate 7 and 8 times. What we've encountered is a behavioral resistance, which is comparable to Fair Isaac's resistance they encountered in the 40s, where they were basically offering a very similar product to people and they faced the exact same behavioral resistance. How did they overcome the resistance? When Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, who are the underwriters of mortgages and loans for the federal government in the 1970s, were launching, they required banks to use FICO scores so that there was comparability, because the regulatory agencies, Freddie Mac, or quasi-regulatory agencies, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, required the scores, then every bank used them. And now, of course, it's almost the first thing they check is your credit score. So it was legislated that these scores were necessary, but they encountered the exact same behavioral resistances that we encountered, and they're still there, which means if you're willing to look yourself in the mirror and learn these skills, you're going to have a leg up on the pros because they're definitely not doing it. And so we're closing our doors mostly because we can't make money doing what we're doing.
And that goes into I know we talk, and I don't want to make this all about this, but it's just incredible the parallels between you and Chris Camillo. You know that we talked about that in the last call. The social arb investor, and he created a company called Ticker Tags, which basically could find any key terms and keywords and show the correlation between that and the stock going up or going down. And companies on Wall Street refused to buy it because they said it would make the managers look incompetent or something like that. And so there's huge blind spots on Wall Street. But at the same time, this is part of my theory as to why I don't think AI is going to be as huge a game changer as people are saying in terms of human nature. Because I don't know if you've read Yuval Harari.
I haven't.
Okay, called Homo Deus is one of his great works, where he talks about the fact that we're just going to become completely based upon logic and algorithms. And this was years ago. And he said an algorithm's going to tell you who to marry, and they know better than you what you should eat, what you should do. But people are going to resist that. And I think your intuitive understanding and my intuitive understanding goes into the fact that there is, first of all, no objective truth, right? The observer effect. So if an AI is going to tell me, well, quantifiably, I think you said in your book that there's going to be a measure for the confidence of a CEO or something like that. But that's changing all the time anyway. And my confidence changes according as to whether I observe it or not. You see what I'm getting at there?
Sure.
So AI says there's an algorithm, and I can tell you exactly what you're thinking, what you're feeling, what's deception, what's not. But I think all that changes according to who's observing it, right?
Well, of course, because people can only relate it to their own knowledge set, their own mental models of the world, their own preferences for how the world ought to be. And in that, there's correct viewpoint and incorrect viewpoint. And it's very difficult to discover the incorrect viewpoint. It's very difficult to not use approximations of reality. And that's one of the core teachings of the intuitive investors, to give you skills so that you're not attached to preferred mental models. You can recognize their functioning and their limitations. And instead of defaulting to, well, I only ever buy stocks that fit these 10 criteria, and the way, capital W, the way, you instead say, look, That's one way to buy stocks, but are the criteria that need to be met, that are satisfied here, is that the correct mental model for right now? And it takes a very big consciousness and a self-effacing ego to say, hey, maybe I don't understand right now, and so I need to borrow somebody else's mental model. Said another way, and with an example, I always thought the distinction between growth investing and value investing was a foolish distinction, because there are times when you ought to be a growth investor and there are times when you ought to be a value investor. There are times when you ought to be a momentum investor. There are times when you should trust your grandparents about an investment idea. There are times when you should not trust your grandparents. Discernment is the skill, and discernment is very difficult. And people like Buffett and people like Jim Rogers, who I know you have had on your podcast before. These are people who have demonstrated discernment and routinely, and they don't necessarily have a method. What they have is discernment. Now, I think, and I believe it is the case that some people, they have mental models that they use to translate why they bought a stock, but it confuses the issue. What I'm trying to say is they may not have the inner dialogue with their consciousness necessary to say, hey, I've actually broken the rules here relative to my model. But to the degree that this stock purchase or bond purchase or real estate purchase, whatever the purchase is, the investment purchase is, these are the aspects that do fit my model. And so I'll communicate that's why I bought it. But what they're leaving off the table is the understanding of the other parts of their consciousness that registered in were true and correct, but they lack the language to be able to describe it. So one of the teachings in Intuitive Investor is you have to discover an ability to describe what you're experiencing. You have to translate it into language, because then you can begin to identify, hey, maybe I need to update the model. Maybe there's a second model. There's model 1A, model 1B, model 1C, and A, B, and C I was doing intuitively, but not intellectually. And the way you intellectualize your intuition is to be able to put it into a medium of understanding. Could be a spreadsheet model that's descriptive. It could be poetry, like seriously, like it could be George Soros famously had a tickling in his stomach.
I was going to mention that. Yes.
Yeah, right. Like that was his way of translating, oh, something's not right here. And he was then able to translate that into a decision. So anyway, digressing massively.
Yes.
But I think that AI is so overblown. And here are the two main reasons why. The people who are huge AI fans don't understand human consciousness and its profundity. And I think that, and it's not just human consciousness, it's the consciousness of a cat, a dog, a whale, a mosquito. It doesn't matter. Consciousness, I think, is the ground of reality, not matter. That's hard to wrap your minds around, but that's exactly what quantum physics teaches us. And because AI is based in matter, not in consciousness, it's always going to be an approximation of consciousness. Just fundamentally, it's going to be. But the second reason is large language models like a ChatGPT or Anthropic's product, or forgetting what X's large language model is called. Each of the big tech, thank you. Each of the big tech firms has a large language model. They don't actually have a model of how the world should actually operate, whereas conscious beings do. So for example, here's an example that every large language model fails at. You ask, what is the best chess move relative to the current layout of the board? And if you iterate that forward, even ChatGPT 5.0 fails after the third move, and it starts recommending moves that are in violation of the rules of chess. Why? Because it doesn't have a rudimentary model of the rules of chess. And so what it's doing, because this is what large language models are, they're a probabilistic guess as to what the next best word should be, given the first 3 words, or first 5 words, or first 453 words. And so if there's a move that's been described on the web, where this was the state of the board that somebody put up there, it will pair it back to that move. But it then doesn't understand necessarily the third move and the third iteration of that model, because there's no working model of the rules of chess that's stored. But when we evaluate things like, should I go outside for a walk? We know the temperature is an important factor. Do I have sunscreen? It's an important factor. AI lacks any model of why that's important. So
precisely.
Yeah,
and that could be good news,
working model. Sorry to finish close paren. Until it has that working model, large language models aren't the answer. Large language models are interesting, but the AI of the early 2000s was working on building a hyper encyclopedia of common mental models like a chess match, or how do I go for a walk, or how do I fry an egg? And large language models lack that. And so I think there's going to be a revisiting of AI to those older models and those older efforts to build a working model of the universe, which all of us as human beings, we're walking around with those models already. And then the question becomes, which model now? Anyway, you said something, I cut you off. Sorry.
No, no, and I'm sorry, but I said that could actually be good news because it means that we're not going to be replaced, as some people are saying, as humanity, as consciousness, as our intuition. We'll always have these tools, but we're not going to be replaced.
Exactly. And that's part of why I wrote The Intuitive Investors. I felt that intuition is a human only skill and always going to be out of the reach of a computer, always out of the reach of most investors because they don't slow down to do the consciousness work necessary to be able to make these sorts of discernment judgments that are more accurate than they would be if you didn't have consciousness tools. So that's true. The other thing about AI that I think it deserves to be read into this record is that every firm that I am aware of that has a huge AI project going on, they will tell me privately that they're failing, that they haven't been able to get it to work, that they've been sold a bill of goods by Google, or they've been sold a bill of goods from Amazon Web Services, or they've been sold a bill of goods from Microsoft in terms of what they will be able to do. And they'll be able to create their own internal large language models that will, have unparalleled productivity gains. All of the companies probably are saying we're not able to figure this out, and we're not able to get the productivity gains that have been promised to us. And this, by the way, this is my 32nd year in the investment business. These sorts of promises have been made before about other things, including the internet, that there would be massive productivity gains. The productivity gains of the internet are finally here, but 1991 was the first year, and around 95, 96, all these productivity gains were supposed to be won by the economy, and it took a lot longer for them to be realized by people and companies.
Indeed, and this goes into, and this is just the final question on this vein. Did you see any of the recent interviews with Peter Thiel?
I haven't, but Peter's not somebody I like. But anyway,
tell me
about him.
Not necessarily like his views, but he has one interesting observation. He says that technology, say since the 80s, has just skyrocketed on the devices. But if you look at actual everyday life, it has not progressed that much. I mean, you would think that if technology had advanced so much, we'd be able to get into our car and go to Mars, right? But no, we're still basically working the same amount of time. Real income has actually gone down, and our lives have not actually gotten exponentially better. We are able to use our devices better. So what do you think about that? That there's sort of like a double economy being created. One on the devices where we have a great amount of information, but the other, we're still basically living the same.
Ooh, baby, I have multiple answers, but to unpack, because I'm a systems thinker, to unpack that
Sure.
is going to take some time. So I'll try and chunk it up.
Sure.
The first is Peter Thiel, I believe, is correct. Like I agree with that thought on Peter's part. The next thing is he's also correct about inflation adjusted wages, or you are correct. Inflation adjusted wages are basically flat since 1973. Why is that? Despite supposedly the productivity gains of this little monster right here. So my two components of why that's the case. One, we live in a capitalist society. Why is that relevant to this conversation? Capitalism as an ism, as a pursuit, treats capital as the scarce thing. And the thing that's to be conserved, the things that is to be valued, the thing that is to be appreciated, the thing that is to be have legal structures to facilitate, that is to have intellectual constructs and institutions built around to make more efficient. When capitalism was formulated in the 1700s and the 1800s and the 1900s and the early 20th century, that was true. The world had a deficit of capital, and capital was difficult to come by, and most capital was based in land and labor. There was very little intellectual capital, so it made sense to conserve it. But the natural outcome of preserving capitalism and treating it as precious is that those who own capital will accumulate it, and massively. And so you see a growing divide between capitalists, those who own the capital, and those who volunteer and sell their labor by contrast. And most of us work selling our labor, not our ideas or other capital. You sell your capital in the form of your podcast, but you also are a laborer, and it's
Sure.
hard to sell capital. And so we've set up institutions and structures that favor capital. Here are a couple of examples. Which taxes are higher, your income taxes or your capital gains taxes? Your income taxes. So if I'm selling my labor, I'm paying more to sell my labor than I am to invest my capital. That was put in place to encourage people to invest in capital, in stocks and things like that. And that's one of the reasons it makes sense to invest in the stock market. Is it easier to sell your labor in the UK or Mexico or Canada or anywhere in the world? Is it easier to invest in those countries' stock markets and open up a financial account in those countries? Or is it easier for you to sell your labor?
Easier to invest.
Easier to invest. I have investment accounts in other countries. I can't legally sell my labor here in Mexico where I live. I can in the US. So I'm treating capital in a special way. So what that means is capitalists have accumulated the wealth predominantly. The benefit is not going to labor. We have an interesting problem. If the promise of AI and these other technologies is to offload the ability that, or not the ability, but the amount of time you would want to sell your labor, like productivity gains, who will realize the benefits of that? The capitalists? Or now you're working 20 hours. Why? Because the 20 hours you sold in your 40-hour total that were the other administrative tasks that now AI can do, the benefits of that efficiency, they go to shareholders and to the executive management, who usually are shareholders in their own businesses. They're not going to be realized by you. So there's a mismatch there of a particularly kind. The second reason why I agree with Peter Thiel about why is it we have these dynamic technology devices is I think there's also a cost to these devices, and it's the nature of people who work in technology to only log and record the benefits. I think we're way less creative as a society. I think we're way less able to see great business ideas than we were before. I used to teach meditation when I worked at CFA Institute, and I traveled around the world teaching people meditation. And at the beginning of those meditation workshops, I had people download an app onto their mobile devices, which then showed them how much time they spend on their mobile devices. And people did it, and they then, like, I would check back in with them, and it's like, oh my God, I'm on my mobile device 4 to 6 hours a day. That's not productive. Me being on Instagram is not productive time. So they're also productivity killers, not just productivity creators. And so I think that that's the hidden evil of these little monsters. That's why I call them little monsters, is I carefully manage my access to this thing. And Javier, you could probably affirm at the bottom of my emails from Deception Truth Analysis, it says, I check emails between these hours of the day, in the morning and in the evening, not the rest of the time. But most people, when an email comes and they hear the notification on this, they immediately drop everything they're doing. They check the email or text message or the WhatsApp that they've received. And the science shows that those are productivity killers. It takes you almost 40 minutes to re-get in the groove that you're in before you have that interruption. So these things are killing productivity, not creating productivity.
When a text comes, ding, we react to it immediately.
And yeah, I leave mine on silent all day long, and I check it when I want to check it.
That's great. That's a great takeaway for all of the viewers too. And I know even Andrew Huberman talks a lot about that we're dopamine addicts. And this is all like we're just trying to get that shoot of dopamine. We need it more and more.
I'll give you an example. So my wife posted something to Facebook yesterday, and my wife works as an independent contractor, and she'll work like 3 weeks on, 2 weeks off, 4 weeks on, 2 weeks off, whatever. And so right now she's off. She doesn't have any jobs right now. And so she's at home. She posted this thing to Facebook, and she must have checked in every 20 minutes to see how many likes and comments there were. And she'd respond to the comments. And I could see her happy about it. And we were like watching TV, and she wasn't watching TV. She was on this guy, see if this sounds familiar, checking her Facebook posts.
Oh, yeah.
Because she was getting the dopamine hit.
It's dopamine.
So she was doing both activities partially, not fully. She wasn't immersed in the TV, nor was she fully immersed in this either. And so it's a productivity killer, but it's also a dopamine creator. And they, as you know, and probably many people in your audience knows, know that the different creators of Facebook, Instagram, X, LinkedIn, they've intentionally worked with the dopamine system to encourage you to check in, because every time you check in, there's a new ad that's served up to you.
Certainly so. And so, just shifting gears a little bit, and this will sort of tie into this. Um, the other day, about 4 days ago, as you know, probably the S&P 500 hit another all-time high. And I remember about a year ago, we had the big stock market crash. I sent you an email, and you were busy at that time, but you sent me an email with some great points. And some of those points were the fact that, you know, the stock market generally goes up because people are trying to go work, they're trying to make better products. So as long as people are always going to work and trying to serve the consumer, trying to make better products, the stock market will, as a trend, go up. And you know, there's an investment person I follow named Gerald Peters, and he talks
I
about
know,
the
Joe.
fact that the S, you know, Gerald Peters, he's a great
Yep.
trader, and he'll love the shout out because he's a friend of mine as well. But he talks about the fact that the S&P 500, the market over time, is always going to go up. Do you share that sentiment as well?
I do, and here's my rationale. It's not just the S&P 500, but stock markets in general should.
Mhm.
Earlier, I said capital is treated favorably relative to other capital, and because it's treated favorably, and there's a philosophical point here. There's a belief that capitalists take risks, and because they take risks, they ought to be more fairly rewarded. And as long as that is a part of the psychology of those who construct economies and construct legal structures, stocks will be treated favorably. We talk, for example, that the capital gains tax is lower than the income tax, and the reason why is to encourage people to invest in the stock market. So that's one. There's already a premium built in there. Two, owners receive the residual amount, and not a fixed amount, from the benefits of companies appreciating and building a better mousetrap. So that's another reason. But the other reason is the solid foundations underneath. If you people who are listening to this, go to my blog, jasonapollovoss.com. I did a post in the Great Recession called the solid foundations underneath, something to that effect. Use my search function, you'll find the blog post.
Yeah.
And it said the reason the people should not be afraid is, in general, and I don't know the exact numbers, this is a heuristic, people do go to work trying to make their lives better. Not necessarily they consider, you framed it as the consumer's life. Yeah, I think a third of business people are interested in serving their customer. I think a third are kind of interested in that, but it's also a priority that they get paid. And then a third probably are nihilists, and they don't care about their work at all. And they probably, if they get fired, they'll just go get another job because they just want the paycheck. That's true. But I think most people, 2/3 of people in the equation I just gave, the heuristic equation, 2/3 are trying to make their own lives better. They're not nihilistic. As long as they're doing that, they're looking for new opportunities. They're trying to make their kids' lives better. They're trying to find a way to save money on their bills. As long as that's true, that means there's going to be productivity growth. If there's productivity growth, the companies that aid and abet that are going to benefit. And that's why I always confidently know that, give it enough time, sans a meteor striking the earth and destroying everything in all capital institutions, that generally speaking, the stock market is going to appreciate over any like 18 to 36-month period. And I just know that. Most people, like, you talk to most people, if you encounter a stranger on a plane or at a bar, hey, what are you up to? Well, they'll talk to you about the angst in their life. And that angst is, I'm trying to make my life better and it's hard. They could say no to that angst by just not trying to make life better. But most people are. The angst comes from
Most
trying to
people
make their
are.
life better.
So
So
the
go ahead.
question is here, and you know Jim Rogers, and through our mutual friend Kim Kurta has also interviewed Jim Rogers. He's a great intuitive investor as well. He, as you told me, has certain spiritual processes. Do people like Jim Rogers who tend to take a bearish outlook, do they have a certain blind spot to this? Because I remember I talked to Jim Rogers last before this, during the Israel-Iran situation, and Jim Rogers was saying, "No, this is it. You know, we're probably going into World War III." Thankfully, that didn't happen. Is there a certain blind spot here that even very intuitive people could get sucked into? And if so, what is it? The taking a negative stance, whereas very obviously it seems through the empirical data and through what we're saying that all of that negative stuff tends to get ironed out.
Javier, you should be credited with the quality of your questions because they require complex answers. I can't speak about Jim specifically. For a couple of things, I'm ordering my thoughts to put them in sequence. The first thing is you're a rock star investor if you're right 60% of the time.
Absolutely.
Jim was right more than 60% of the time. So what that means, though, that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is he's wrong 40 relative to this question. He's wrong 40% of the time. So Jim's given a free pass for being wrong about, Israel, Iran. Second of all, Jim hasn't been involved in the markets on a daily basis for a long time. I can testify I have not been directly involved for a long time. The people who do investing extraordinarily well, or they do football extraordinarily well, or they do advertising extremely well, they are immersed in that subject matter. Jim is no longer immersed by his own admission because I watched his interview, the one interview before our interview last year. I watched his interview that you've done with him, and by his own confession, he's in retirement, right? And because he's not immersed any longer, when you're immersed, it's like being the spider on the web. You can feel every breeze on that web, and you know exactly which of your 8 legs has been twitching, and you know which leg that ties to in terms of your mental models and what you need to do appropriately. It's a very different thing than viewing it sort of subjectively and called upon occasionally. And you've asked me to be on your show a couple times beyond our first interview, and I've declined because I'm not immersed. I don't know that I have a valued or valuable opinion. Like I've tried to volunteer where I think I have a valuable opinion. Our subject matter today, we haven't even gotten to yet. And
Sure,
so
yes.
I try only to talk about things I can be valuable in contributing toward. Second of all, geopolitics are really tricky. And they're really tricky because they're political. And politicians serve many masters. And that's true in Iran, even though they have kind of an oligarchy or they have a theocracy set up. And it's really hard in those kinds of situations to know exactly which constituency or stakeholder in their point of view they are trying to satisfy at any given time. I think it's one of my gifts. Honestly, I think I did a very good job when I was working as a professional investor, understanding geopolitics, but I was also spending 3 hours a day to try and understand it because I saw it as a value add, because I saw that most investors were pretty terrible at it. And that, by the way, for your listenership, your viewership, if people are bad at something, it's a genius opportunity to try and do something well, like intuition, like consciousness, like geopolitics, like large language models. If you could build your own large language model, like whatever it is, if people stink at it, it's a great opportunity because it means there are not many people with whom you're competing for the additional alpha that can be earned by doing that thing well. So I guess the last thing I'll say about the Israeli-Iran thing, this is my and I still follow geopolitics, but not 3 hours a day. I probably follow it for an hour a day now, and I think thoughtfully about this stuff. Iran has a pretty terrible hand that it's been dealt. And the terrible hand that it's been dealt is it's a mountainous nation which has poor mineral wealth, but for oil. And everything for them is about oil, which means the screws can be like twisted down on their thumbs very easily. And it doesn't take much to get them to quiet down. But their political constituency is we have a social contract with our citizens that we oppress you so long as we put food on your table. So them getting blustery and saber rattling was primarily about, hey, just so you know, we're watching you back, your back, but their real options that are available to them are fairly low. They could mine the Straits of Hormuz and cut off the oil transit in that Strait of Hormuz, but that would probably lead to a nuclear war. They will
Indeed,
only do that if there's a threat of invasion. And even then they would lose because minesweepers would remove that threat pretty quickly. And so they don't really have much of a card or hand to deal other than saber rattling and the occasional terrorist attack, which is just irritating enough to get attention turned to their particular issues. And that's about it. They just have a poor hand that they've been dealt geopolitically. So anytime I hear bluster out of Iran, I know that very shortly thereafter, as soon as they have checked in with whatever constituencies they're trying to satisfy internally, as soon as people feel that they've made the correct statement against the great Satan, likely they're going to pipe down.
It's a good investment opportunity, that maybe, if you know what to invest in. But just getting to the main subject matter, I wanted you to come on because there are very interesting murmuring, so to speak, from Wall Street the other day. And just incidentally, I found a channel of yours a few months ago, or a channel where you and a friend of yours were doing podcasts from the research chair. And it's just a great, informative channel. I can't believe it. Like some of my videos, I can't believe that they have so few views, but I would recommend everyone to watch this because you talk about like financial accounting, talk about geopolitics, investing, portfolio management, things like that. It's just a very great channel. So
all the secrets are there.
All the secrets are there.
You would pay me thousands of dollars to do as a consultant. Most of them are there.
That's right. It's just a great channel. So I'd recommend everyone watch that from the research channel. I'll put a link there. But so there's been recent talk, and this started with Trump sort of saying, I think that they should report less, So the SEC may move from quarterly reporting to 6-month reporting. And apparently this is what was done, I believe, 50, 60 years ago. They were only required to report every 6 months. So from your perspective, first of all, is this a good or bad thing? Because my question that comes up is, we have the technology. First of all, why wouldn't we report numbers live, real time for every company? Like, for example, they just made a sale. Why wouldn't that just be out there publicly? There's got to be a reason. And then the second question is, okay, why wouldn't we just require them to report every year? So what are the pros and cons of them moving the reporting from every 3 months to every 6 months, if any?
Okay, so I'm going to take the liability side of the ledger first, because it's the easier one to communicate. The liability side of the ledger is, I agree with you. I'm going to use the same framing question I used earlier with regard to being able to measure the level of deceptiveness or truthfulness in almost any communication. The technology already exists. Can I imagine a world in 50 years in which we don't have daily transparency into the reporting of companies? No. It already exists. Like Cisco famously can manage their entire financial apparatus and has been able to for over 15 years on a daily basis. Most large, especially S&P 500 firms, are managing their basis with near flawless transparency into their operations. They already could. What they're afraid of is revealing too much to their competitors in terms of the success of new product launches, markets that may, like regions that may be outperforming others, that benefits, like say you're a competitor of Cisco, and Cisco's running an ad campaign, you can immediately see an income statement effect. Well, then the competitor knows, hey, we better match the advertising budget to blunt that. So you're really giving away competitive secrets. So could we? Yes, we can already do that. Will we? Probably not. But not because it's not possible, but because the competitiveness of these businesses requires that probably firms never will want to reveal indirectly and even obscurely and as abstractly as a $40 billion revenue company may be. When it's synthesized into a 20 line item income statement, there's still enough there that competitors who are thoughtful and understand the nature of the business will be able to extract competitive insights. You wouldn't want to give that away. So the liability side is, could we do it more regularly? Yes. And I've thought for a long time they could probably do it monthly without too much consequence, because even the marketing plans are fairly obvious. Because if you're a competitor, there's a group at your company who's tracking the competitive position of your competition. The investor relations teams absolutely do it. And they know and have heard the rumorings of new ad campaigns that are coming out. They know the product pipeline. They can read the annual reports just as well as shareholders can to see what's in the product development pipeline, etc. So the liability side is they could do it. I think I could see monthly. I don't think daily will ever be the case for the public for the reasons I described. The other liability side of the quarterly thing is, I have thought for a long time, I guess this is more on the asset side, I have thought for a long time businesses are inappropriately riding their bicycles, staring at the front wheel. They are too short-term focused. I've had conversations with management for 25 years. When I have the opportunity to speak with them, do you find the quarterly earnings cycle frustrating? Universally, they say yes. But is moving the problem from a quarterly to a semi-annual reporting, does that address the problem? In my opinion, no, because they're on a quarterly earnings cycle, not because of the requirement that the SEC has in place. The problem is the sell side research community, for whatever reason, requires the quarterly update. I think because they're on a trading cycle, and the more news, the more frequently, the more they can update their position, buy, sell, hold on a company, equals the more they can contact through the brokerage network, their share, their investor network, institutional investors, the Javier Navas, the Jason Bosses, who are individuals, the more they can have an excuse to contact us because they've updated their model. That's why there's a quarterly earnings cycle. So this doesn't address that necessarily, because the brokerage community is the source of the problem, and the slavish devotion to that brokerage community and the rating that the company seeks to receive from Wall Street, that's the source of the problem. So it's indirectly addressing it. Am I a fan of the movement? Yes. And people may be surprised because I said I moved to Mexico to escape the political situation of the United States. So people may have inferred that means I'm anti-Trump. That's kind of true. But I actually think this is probably a good idea. The way I would implement it, though, is to make it elective on the part of the companies, that it's not illegal. And it's actually technically a legal requirement only because the SEC retains the right, I think through the 1933 Act, to set the regulatory framework for satisfying the requirements of the 33 Act, so they can change the regulatory framework to only require semi-annual, but it can be optional. I would be willing to bet if they made it optional, only about a third of companies, maybe 40% of companies would switch to semi-annual reporting. And by the way, as an investor, that would signal to me those are interesting companies because they understand that when I'm riding a bicycle, I can't just look at the front wheel. Because if I only look at that short-term reality, yes, I see every nail that may be in the tire. I may see every pothole, but I'm missing the destination and making the micro adjustments necessary to my travel path so that I can actually get to my destination as a bicycle rider, which is necessary with long-term perspective. That would signal to me those are interesting companies to take a look at, because and probably what would happen is there'd be a sell-off on those companies, but in the long run, to me, that'd be an opportunity because they're signaling to me, hey, we're interested in managing this business for long-term success, but for the nuisance of placating a Wall Street master that is focused on the wrong stuff. Anyway, that's my opinion.
It's so short term. It sort of goes into, like, I believe George Soros, who would tell his investors, you give me your money and don't talk to me for a year. In a year, I'll tell you what's going on with it, because I need these results in 3 months. That's just not, again, that's not taking a long-term outlook. And so therefore, sometimes you're sacrificing the long-term for the expense of the short-term gains.
Yeah, in my perspective, it's one of the problems with stock market investing is that there's too much short-termism. Like the fact that the market fluctuates to the degree that it does is, to me, evidence of people's inability to even digest the limited amount of information they are getting. And that information is of low quality in my estimation, because a company, especially a large size company, even a small cap company, may have a $2 billion revenue line. It is almost impossible to have a meaningful impact on your business as an executive, even at that small a scale. It is hard in a 3-month period to have a meaningful impact on your company. It just is. It just is.
It goes by like that. But so can we go over for a few minutes?
Sure, of course.
Maybe like 10, because I wanted to go into this aspect that we touched on in the last interview about what's the trade-off between intuition and sort of expertise. Because what you told me in the last interview, and this is true, there are no stupid people on Wall Street. There are no people that don't know the jargon. But I want you to listen to this clip. And it's from, we talked about Chris Camillo, these guys who are basically, they're normal guys who turned like $20,000 into $40 million in like a 10-year period. And I just want you to listen to this clip. And this was from a show that was about 4 weeks ago. if you can hear
You
it.
see it and it's not moving. It's like, what did I miss?
Can you hear it?
Right, that's what I'm always concerned about.
How did I get this before anyone else?
Right.
Guys, I'm literally just doing it on the sofa, reading Twitter, and then I'm not even a fast trader. You know how I gotta find my glasses. I gotta make sure I'm not accidentally shorting the company.
You gotta do this with your phone a little bit. You gotta hold it out.
You know, I make a trading mistake about 1 out of every 20 trades is a mistake.
That's a terrible average, by the way.
It's terrible.
I do the same thing, mainly with options because I always pick the wrong date.
By the way, can I tell you guys something? I screwed up royally last week. I had Lululemon calls, as you know, okay? I thought my calls expired this Friday, which they did originally. But at some point, I traded my calls up, which is, for those of you all watching, you know I do this. When my calls are up, I will basically sell those calls. I will pocket the gains. I will take part of the profits, and I will purchase new calls, okay, at a higher strike price, basically guaranteeing profits, right? So like, and lowering downside risk. So I did that last week. But when I did it, I mistakenly bought the wrong expiration date. So here's what happened. At the end of the week, one of my buddies, Russ, I think it was Saturday, he said, hey, like, what's going on with Lulu? I was like, oh, here's what I currently have in Lulu. I just sent him a screenshot of my account. No, I did that on Friday. Excuse me. I did that Friday morning. On Saturday, he goes, so, did you end up selling all those Lulu? Did you exercise? What did you do? I was like, what are you talking about? I just have options. Why would I have to have exercised? He's like, well, they expired yesterday because he saw a screenshot of my
No.
and I was like,
So basically, he talks about this a lot. He lost like thousands of dollars because he bought the wrong expiration date for. So basically, these guys are by no means investment professionals. A lot of times, they don't even know the jargon. You see a lot of like experts and not experts, but you see a lot of high performers in many fields. A lot of times, they know nothing almost about the field they're in. So to what point does intuition or just grit overcome the lack of knowledge in the subject, especially in investing? I'm just interested to know your opinion on that, being that you are heavily into teaching intuition and investing.
Sure, it's a great question. So it goes back to what I was saying earlier in our conversation today, with having an intuition about something and being able to have a language to describe that insight are two different things. And so what are the intuition skills that's most difficult is I'll just go through all the steps for completeness for the audience. Intuition is frequently confused with instinct, two different things. Instinct is literally like the thing that allows you to survive when you go to the watering hole and you're like, something doesn't feel right. And there's a crocodile that's at the bottom of the watering hole. As you dip your hand in, the crocodile bites your hand and drags you away. That's instinct. Intuition is different because you can program intuition. It's a state of consciousness in which you are free of mental attachments like your mental models. You are free of, you're free to the degree that you choose your expertise. So that takes a lot of work. You have to strip off your personality quirks. Like if you're a risk taker and you admire that about yourself, that's something that's egoic, right? I take pride compared to my other friends. I will do bungee jumping and they won't. Well, that's great. But the problem with that is it's a bias toward the world that may not serve you. And again, as I said earlier, you have to choose whether or not currently being a risk taker is appropriate. So you have to be able to do a lot of personal work to identify your boundaries of your personality, which means your limitations that are driven by your prejudices and preferences for how the world ought to look and ought to be. And intuition is that state of consciousness where you're aware of just the world as it is, not how you prefer it to be. That is really hard to do, first of all. Second of all, that is always nonlinear. So the insights that are gained there always feel like something, but then you have to translate that feeling into some form of action, which is where expertise comes in. So expertise is useful to the degree that you can translate that into something meaningful that allows you to understand the intuitive insight, which then allows you to take appropriate action. Let's go back to my sports analogy earlier. I said that you have to be immersed. I said Jim Rogers is no longer immersed. I didn't quite finish that thought, my mistake. Michael Jordan stepped away from the game of basketball for a couple of years. He came back. It took him a while to be as good as he was before because he hadn't been immersed. So
Oh,
the point is that he had to remember the expertise. But everybody who ever saw Michael Jordan, there's a great example. It's actually featuring in the new edition of the Intuitive Investor. I have a link to the video. The Eastern Conference semifinals, Game 7. The Bulls are down by 2. And there's like 1.8 seconds left on the clock. Everybody in the arena knows that Michael Jordan is going to get the ball. They put the Defensive Player of the Year on him. He gets the ball. He knows exactly how to dribble to hit the shot. That is both expertise and intuition. Intuition is his unbiased getting out of the way. Phil Jackson may have drawn up a plan. You do this, you pass, whatever. He felt the emptiness or the space for his shot to get off, and his expertise was the ability to execute it. That's intuition. My point in all this is, relative to these guys, they do have expertise. They themselves said, these are the things I typically execute. I would argue if they've had that level of success, they also have intuition. Them having knowledge of the science of intuition, as I describe it, is a different matter. They wouldn't necessarily describe it as that. Buffett may not describe, and I think Buffett's a brilliant intuitive. He doesn't necessarily understand that that's the process that's going on. He doesn't have to know. He's developed tools that support his intuitive insights about executives, companies, competitive positions of companies, future prospects relative to the economy of different types of businesses, etc. But he's a highly intuitive guy, and he's able to translate that into expertise. So I think there's complementary skill sets. Where expertise can be an obstacle is if expertise is blindly applied in defiance of what's actually happening. The real skill set is discernment. If I have discernment, I can use the entirety of my skill set. And that discernment may tell me, oh, this situation is exactly like another problem I solved that I succeeded at, like shooting a free throw. I don't have to reinvent every time I'm at the free throw line how to shoot a free throw. I go, oh, this is a problem I solved before. Now I need to get in the zone. I need to tune out everything that's around me. The crowd's going wild. There's high stakes to me making these free throws. If I can tune all that out, I can nail my technique and my expertise. Now my expertise matters. But where it doesn't matter is if you're going to shoot a jump shot, as Michael Jordan did at the end. He goes, in practice yesterday, my coach was saying to me the following, Michael, you're not rolling off your toes enough, and as you're not following through enough on the ball. If he had done that on that shot, he would have missed. And we all know it. Anybody who's played sports knows being two in the head. That is when expertise is your enemy. And the discernment and the magic of discernment is I choose whether I'm on or whether I'm off. And is there expertise in football? Absolutely. Drawing up the right plan for right now and then being able to execute on that. And all the years of effort, how to catch a pass, how to throw a pass, how to block the defensive ends, all of that's expertise. But the intuition is knowing what skill set is needed now in the moment. So I think they're complementary. I don't know if that answered your question, but I heard evidence in that clip you played of intuition. I also heard lots of expertise, even if they don't understand the jargon. And jargon, I would argue, is not expertise. It's sociological nonsense. And that's one of the obstacles to you and me as individual investors doing well, is that we think we have to master jargon to be experts. And I would argue it's a meaningless and thankless task. Like, why is the 180-day moving average important to you in your investment process? It's just jargon. If it is, on the other hand, expertise, you can execute it as a valuable tool because it honors and exalts the way you understand and see the world, and it serves your art of being an investor, then it's expertise. Otherwise, it's just jargon. And so, sorry, last point, the intuitive investor is about how do I discover what I'm good at as an investor? I'm not good as a trader. Those guys are traders. I can't do what they do. But they can't do what I did either because they have a different expertise, but they've developed tools largely through a reflective process that serve and exalt their real talents. And I think these guys probably know exactly what their real talents are, and they've developed tools that serve that, which is their expertise. Do they occasionally screw up? Sure, we all do. So anyway, long answer. But I heard evidence of both intuition and expertise in that back and forth between, it sounded like three people.
Yes, they did. That's There are three investors here in Dallas, and they just have a great show. So, as far as discernment, just as I guess as briefly as possible, is there a objective process by which we can hone our discernment?
Yeah, I
Just
think
in
that's
general,
I think that's
what
what the
intuition is.
intuition state of consciousness is, and there's an exercise in the intuitive investor about how to align your consciousness with a moment or a thing. Um, and on my blog, on jasonapollovoss.com, in the heart of the great financial crisis, the market low was the 9th of March, 2009. And I describe on March the 12th, 2009, I made a call and I said, the worst is over. And what did I do to make that call? And by the way, I had that feeling on the close of the Dow on March the 9th, 2009, but I had been wrong about a similar thing that I had declared on my blog 3 months earlier, which by the way had been the 3-month low. The process was the same, but the question I put to consciousness was wrong. It was misframed. And here's what I did. If you have the ability to turn off your mental models, your prejudices and preferences for how the world ought to be, that's kind of a state that the Buddhists will call the void consciousness or the state of nothingness. And it's because there are no concepts in your head. It's just pure, and they call it pure light consciousness. It means you're able to feel things as they are, not how you would prefer them to be. You can then ask of that consciousness, you can go, what is the mood of the market? You relax and you sort of orient your consciousness and you scale to it and you start to harmonize with that state of the market. Well, on March the 9th, 2009, as it had been in like November 2008, when I'd made a similar call, the feeling I got, and mind you, I had to translate the feeling into words, was the feeling that people get after they've had the flu and they finally vomited enough that they're like, there's that sense of relief of like, oh, I'm so glad I have passed that sickness through my body. Or if you're drunk and you've overdrank, and I've only ever drunk so much in my life that I've vomited once, I'm happy to say I learned my limit. It's that same feeling of, okay, I don't need to do that. And that was the feeling I had. I was like, well, that's a very interesting feeling, because for many trading days prior to that, I've been tuning in and all I thought was anxiety.
Now, just very quickly to insert this, that to harmonize with something or to tap into the market or what have you, do you have to have expertise with this thing? Like, can I tap it? Can a person who's never read about the stock market tap into the market, or do you have to already have some expertise?
No, the expertise there that would be called upon is the ability to translate that feeling of relief after a vomiting into the words like I just did. And because you're experiencing that as a feeling that is by definition multidimensional and nonlinear, but the mediums of expression that we have and this is why at the beginning of the intuitive investor, I describe the ways that we describe the world around us. We have words, we have numbers, we have art like singing, dancing, painting, poetry. All of those are linear modes of expression. They're all linear. That means necessarily, if you're describing something multidimensional and simultaneous and nonlinear, that they're going to be a limited means. And so the expertise that's called upon in those moments is, how do I translate this feeling into something meaningful that I can begin to think about? Thinking is a purely expertise-oriented thing. And so my ability to translate that feeling into language was the expertise that allowed me to do it. I don't have to be a stock market investor to know that the market as a whole felt queasy for many days, felt pukey, felt flu-like, felt like it had a sickness it couldn't shake, and now it feels a sense of relief. Oh my God, like that ability to do that, I don't have to know anything about the market to know that that's what it is. So I want to go back to the language thing though. I have an exercise in the book, and I think one of the critical contributors to my success as an investor was, as a teenager, I never thought I'd be a stock market investor. I thought I would be a lead singer of a crazy punk band. So I wrote song lyrics all the time. And the song lyrics were descriptions of ding, 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 my feelings and emotions. And so in writing poetry, I developed the ability to use language to describe what I was feeling and experiencing. And I would spend hours like, hey, is that the right word for what I'm feeling? And if you do that enough, you develop the ability to translate those things. But other people have done it in other ways. Like my wife is really good at describing her anger in particular, right? So she can do a spot on job of precisely describing what it is that's bothering her, is on her mind. That's a skill. It took time and practice and energy and effort to do that. And it takes that kind of ability to do that. In George Soros's case, the expertise he discovered was, when I feel this tingling feeling, I need to pay attention to it. So that's him getting out of his way, going, well, no, dude, it's just that you ate too much Mexican food at lunch and the tingling you're feeling is indigestion. Like, he finally developed an unbiased way of knowing, hey, there's something there that's meaningful. He never did develop it into something linear, other than I know I need to trust that. But he actually describes being able to tune into the something of import. The feedback he got was the tingling in his gut, but he never did develop that into something analytical. He just knew that that was meaningful. And so he almost got there to the linear state. I think when it's linear, then you can decide, Javier, is it an Excel spreadsheet that solves my problem? Is it going back through my lessons learned list from my times as a trader? To what degree does this current trade remind me of other trades, and is it the accurate reading that it's identical in terms of its situation? What is the mood of the market, and how should I respond to that? Then you can invoke all your expertise, but your intuition is like a pure light consciousness that's uncorrupted. But it's a really difficult thing, A, to have that state of consciousness, hard to develop it, and then two, it's really hard, even if you can do that, to then translate it into something meaningful. So you then can choose which of your mental models, which aspects of your expertise, which aspects of your education are the valuable parts that serve and honor and exalt the current moment of buy, sell, hold.
And that can just be developed by practice, correct?
Yeah, like here's a great exercise. This is one of the ways I intentionally, when I was a fund manager, because I was aware that intuition was a weapon or a tool, choose your nomenclature. I would drive, because I had to drive to and from work. So I had a morning rush hour commute. I had an evening rush hour commute. And I would try and get into that pure late state of consciousness to tune into the driver in front of me to know, are they going to turn left or right? Or keep going straight? Or keep going straight? Yeah, so it's just like three choices. Very simple. Left, straight, right. And the first time, like million times, I'm exaggerating. For a couple of years when I would do that, I was right maybe a little bit more than half, not enough to trust my intuition on that. Now I've developed that skill. I'm right probably 85, 90% of the time. And
Wow.
I can, because people will form the intention in their mind as drivers. Oh, I got to slow down and pay attention because I know my turn's coming up. And when they do that, they're visualizing and creating a mental thought pattern that sets the intention of left. And you as an intuitive should be able to feel that intention if you're good. So, and you could do it at the grocery store too. Men tend to be more consumed with this than women. Like, I hate dealing with shopping cart traffic. Like, I'm at the grocery store. My worst time to go is noon on a Saturday.
Oh,
because
yeah.
the lanes are jammed and you're trying to pick what's the fastest lane. Similar exercise, because then you're tuning in through the intuition. How motivated is the checkout person, right? You look at the carts. Here's the expertise. Here's the objective opinion. Oh my God, there's 700 items and 3 carts with 700 items in them. Are they going to pay with a check? Right? All of these problems can be turned to intuition. How fast are they going to be unloading the shopping cart? These are all very multidimensional, complex situations that could be solved with intuition, and they're costless. They don't cost you anything other than time and your own personal embarrassment of having been wrong. So I've always advised, especially with the traffic situation, there are no stakes. There are no stakes other than being wrong. And then that becomes feedback for, I guess I wasn't really paying attention. But I hope the audience takes it on faith, because you can only do it on faith until you have that experience that you can feel whether or not somebody forms the intention to turn left, turn right, or go straight. It is possible.
It's completely scientific. Like, I remember there have been studies that say that there's an impulse in your brain that you develop the impulse to move your arm, for example, before you know it. Before that impulse develops, the arm can move, but like a fraction of a millisecond or something.
That is absolutely correct. You're totally correct. I just was reviewing that literature for the Intuitive Investor Living Edition to feature that work. And it was so powerful, the results, and it's been replicated many times, that sometimes scientists have concluded we don't have free will, and that there's a model, grand, universal, godlike model operating on all of us, and we don't have free will, and it's preordained that you're going to act in accord to this inner voice. I don't think that's true. I think the universe has both free will and destiny aspects layered into it, but that's a metaphysical conversation, not a scientific conversation. So, but you are absolutely correct. That has been discovered multiple times, that the intention to do it is there before the actual doing of it. And you can't, the part to take on faith is that another consciousness can feel that. There's also scientific evidence of that, which also is what I'm doing in my literature review for the Intuitive Investor, is to begin to feature some of the extensive work that's been done by social psychologists that demonstrates that minds can connect together remotely.
And that's universality. Jason Apollo Voss, thank you so much for your time. I could talk to you for hours, but I know that we have a time restraint here. We always have a great conversation.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you for letting me talk about other subjects other than the SEC thing. That would have been a short call, but to remind the audience, I'm generally in favor of that, especially if what they grant is companies the ability to do quarterly, do daily, do annual, whatever they want to do, or semi-annual, but make semi-annual the regulation. I think that will actually change for the good. Companies being able to report when they want to. And so that's my opinion of that. I think it's a net good, probably for the markets.
And it would change from that. It would show that more long-term focus as opposed to short-term.
Yeah, because I think short-term focus is detrimental for the company's executives who would like to manage their business with more thoughtfulness, with more strategic, with more time to execute their strategy rather than responding and reacting to things tactically because they're afraid they'll meet they won't meet their quarterly earnings estimate, and also end to some extent or reduce some of the gamesmanship of financial statements that occurs because people know that they're going to be short by a penny, so they try and find a penny through ledger domain, through accounting statement manipulation. It'll reduce some of that activity. So generally, I'm in favor of the move.
And that would be my instinct as well. So JasonApolloVoss.com. So when can we expect that the living edition of the Intuitive Investor come out? I'm so excited.
I don't know. But hopefully within the next 10 months. I won't say a year because that's too long. Mm-hmm. But my feeling is it's going to take me about that long to put all the pieces in place for it to launch.
All right, Jason Apollo Voss, thank you so much.
Thanks, Javier. Appreciate it. Thanks, audience.
Again, hopefully.